The moving van rumbled to a stop in front of a quaint, two-story house with a neatly manicured lawn. Sunlight glinted off the freshly painted white siding, and the scent of freshly cut grass hung heavy in the air. 8-year-old Lily, Reverend Elijah Jackson's daughter, bounced excitedly in her car seat, her nose pressed against the window. Her older brother, 10-year-old Samuel, maintained a more stoic demeanor, though a slight smile played on his lips. Elijah, his heart brimming with a mixture of hope and apprehension, carefully unbuckled his seatbelt. This was it, Oakhaven, their new beginning. Oakhaven was a predominantly white neighborhood, a fact Elijah was acutely aware of. He'd spent weeks researching the area, poring over census data and community profiles, trying to gauge the level of acceptance they might encounter. The church board had been supportive, even enthusiastic, about his appointment to lead the small but growing congregation. They saw it as a chance to expand their reach, to plant a seed of faith in a community that seemed to need it. Elijah, however, felt a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He'd faced prejudice before, but this felt different. This was a deliberate move into a space where he and his family might be unwelcome. He helped his children out of the car, their small hands clutching his. The air was thick with the promise of a summer afternoon, the kind that invited laughter and the carefree spirit of childhood. He wanted nothing more than for his children to experience this kind of joy without the shadow of fear or prejudice. The movers were already unloading boxes from the van, their efficient movements a blur of activity. Elijah surveyed the house with a practiced eye. It was modest, but comfortable, with a spacious backyard that Lily would undoubtedly adore. He imagined her playing amongst the flowers, her laughter echoing through the trees. The thought warmed him, pushing back against the lingering unease. As the movers carried boxes inside, a figure emerged from the house next door. A tall, slender man with thinning gray hair and a perpetually furrowed brow. He watched them with an intensity that felt unsettling. He stood on his porch, arms crossed, his gaze unwavering. Elijah tried to offer a friendly wave, a gesture of neighborly welcome, but the man didn't reciprocate. He merely narrowed his eyes, his lips twisting into a thin, disapproving line. Elijah dismissed it as initial apprehension, a common reaction to new neighbors. People needed time to adjust to get to know each other. He forced a smile, hoping to project an image of warmth and approachability. He turned his attention back to the moving process, directing the movers with quiet efficiency. The next few days were a whirlwind of unpacking, organizing, and settling in. Lily and Samuel quickly claimed their rooms, transforming them into miniature kingdoms of toys and books. Elijah spent hours arranging his study, setting up his bookshelves and his desk, creating a sanctuary where he could prepare his sermons and connect with his faith. He found a quiet satisfaction in the simple act of creating a home, a safe haven for his family. But the unease he'd felt upon arrival never truly disappeared. The man next door, whose name he later learned was Arthur Jenkins, remained a constant presence, a silent, watchful observer. He would often stand on his porch, seemingly staring at their house, his gaze heavy with something Elijah couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't merely curiosity. There was a distinct undercurrent of hostility, a palpable tension that hung in the air between their two properties. It was a silent, unspoken threat that cast a long shadow over their new beginning. Elijah hoped it was just a temporary phase, a misunderstanding that could be resolved with a simple conversation, a friendly gesture. But deep down, a sense of foreboding lingered, a whisper of the challenges that lay ahead. He prayed that their new home in Oakhaven would truly be a place of peace and acceptance, but the quiet, watchful eyes of Arthur Jenkins suggested otherwise. The first direct encounter happened on a Tuesday morning. Elijah was tending to his small vegetable garden, a patch of earth he'd painstakingly prepared in the backyard. The scent of freshly turned soil mingled with the sweet perfume of blooming jasmine. Lily was perched on the porch steps, engrossed in a book, while Samuel practiced his basketball dribbling nearby. It was a picture of idyllic domesticity, a scene Elijah cherished. He wanted to hold on to this moment, to etch it into his memory, before the reality of their new surroundings fully settled in. Suddenly, A gruff voice cut through the morning calm. "You know, this ain't exactly the kind of neighborhood for your kind." Arthur Jenkins' voice boomed from the fence separating their properties. Elijah straightened, his trowel pausing mid-air. He turned to see Arthur leaning against the fence, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Elijah with undisguised contempt. Elijah felt a surge of anger, a familiar heat rising in his chest. He'd braced himself for prejudice, but this blunt, unapologetic hostility was jarring. He'd expected subtle slights, perhaps ignored greetings or averted gazes. This was something else entirely. This was blatant, unadulterated racism. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of his commitment to peace and understanding. He wouldn't stoop to Arthur's level. He wouldn't engage in a shouting match or a pointless argument. He would try, one last time, to bridge the chasm of hatred that seemed to separate them. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins," Elijah said, his voice calm and measured. "I'm Reverend Jackson. It's nice to finally meet you." Arthur grunted in response, his eyes still narrowed. "Nice? I wouldn't use that word. I've lived here for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like it. A black pastor moving into this neighborhood. It's just not right." Elijah's patience was wearing thin. He could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. He forced himself to remain composed. "Mr. Jenkins, I understand your apprehension. Change can be unsettling. But I assure you, my family and I intend to be good neighbors. We respect this community, and we hope to be welcomed as part of it." Arthur scoffed. "Welcome? You think you'll be welcomed? You're delusional. This isn't some kind of charity case. This is my neighborhood, and people like you don't belong here." He paused, his gaze sweeping over Elijah's garden. "And that garden is going to attract all sorts of undesirable elements. You'll see." The veiled threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Elijah felt a chill despite the warm morning sun. He realized then that this wasn't just a simple case of neighborly apprehension. This was something far more sinister, a deep-seated prejudice that ran far deeper than a simple disagreement. Arthur's words were a declaration of war, a clear signal that their time in Oakhaven wouldn't be easy. The idyllic scene he'd envisioned moments before had been shattered, replaced by a stark reality of intolerance and hostility. He looked at his children, their innocent faces momentarily obscured by the shadow of Arthur's hateful words. He knew then that this wouldn't be a simple matter of getting to know their neighbor. This was a fight for their place, their safety, their very right to belong. The fight had begun. The initial encounter was just the beginning. Arthur Jenkins' harassment escalated daily, a slow, insidious drip of venom that poisoned the atmosphere around the Jackson family's new home. The daily verbal assaults became a ritual, a predictable torment that punctuated their days. Every morning, as Elijah left for work or tended his garden, Arthur would be there, perched on his porch or leaning over the fence, spewing a fresh torrent of insults and threats. His words were laced with a casual cruelty that was both shocking and chilling. He called Elijah names, questioned his right to be there, and made thinly veiled threats against his family. The children, initially frightened, gradually became desensitized to the daily barrage of hateful words. They learned to brace themselves for the onslaught, to shield themselves from the sting of Arthur's venom. Lily, once so full of life and laughter, became quieter, more withdrawn. Samuel, usually so energetic and playful, started to exhibit signs of anxiety, his usual boisterous demeanor replaced with a nervous tension. Elijah watched helplessly, his heart aching with a mixture of anger and despair. The verbal abuse was bad enough, but it was the subtle acts of vandalism that truly unnerved Elijah. One morning, he found his car tires slashed. Another day, a brick was thrown through his kitchen window. Small things, perhaps, but each act was a calculated assault, a deliberate attempt to intimidate and terrorize. The police were called, reports were filed, but nothing seemed to deter Arthur. He remained brazen, unapologetic, his actions fueled by a hateful ideology that seemed impervious to reason or justice. The most disturbing aspect of the situation was the community's response, or rather, the lack thereof. Elijah had hoped for support, for solidarity from his neighbors. He'd expected at least a few sympathetic ears, a few voices willing to speak out against the injustice he was facing. But he was met with silence, a wall of indifference that was almost as unsettling as Arthur's hatred. People would avert their gazes when he passed them on the street. They would avoid eye contact, pretend not to hear his greetings. Some would even cross the street to avoid him, as if his very presence was contagious. The silence was deafening, a collective refusal to acknowledge the blatant racism unfolding in their midst. He tried to engage with his neighbors, to appeal to their sense of decency and fairness. He knocked on doors, explained his situation, and pleaded for help. But his efforts were met with polite excuses, vague reassurances, and a palpable reluctance to get involved. They would offer platitudes about tolerance and understanding, but their words lacked conviction, their actions betraying their hollow pronouncements. They were afraid, Elijah realized, afraid of Arthur, afraid of rocking the boat, afraid of becoming targets themselves. Their silence was a tacit endorsement of Arthur's hateful behavior, a collective complicity that fueled his escalating acts of harassment. The weight of isolation pressed down on Elijah, a crushing burden that threatened to overwhelm him. He felt like he was fighting a lone battle, a David facing a Goliath of prejudice and indifference. He clung to his faith, to the hope that things would eventually improve, but the daily onslaught of hatred was wearing him down, chipping away at his resolve. The idyllic vision he had once held of Oakhaven was now a distant memory, replaced by a harsh reality of fear, isolation, and the chilling silence of a community unwilling to confront the darkness in its midst. The escalating harassment was not just a personal attack. It was a test of his faith, his resilience, and the very fabric of his community. The weight of Arthur Jenkins' harassment was becoming unbearable, but what was even more disheartening was the deafening silence of the Oakhaven community. Elijah had tried everything he could think of to break through the wall of indifference, to appeal to his neighbors' sense of decency and fairness. He'd knocked on doors, attended community events, even organized a small gathering in his own backyard, hoping to foster a sense of connection and understanding. His attempts were met with a mixture of polite excuses, vague reassurances, and a palpable reluctance to get involved. Mrs. Gable, a sweet-faced woman who lived across the street, offered him a sympathetic smile and a plate of cookies, but when he broached the subject of Arthur's harassment, her eyes darted nervously, and she quickly changed the subject. Mr. Henderson, a retired teacher who lived 2 doors down, listened patiently as Elijah recounted the incidents, but his response was a dismissive shrug and a mumbled something about neighborly disputes. Even the younger families, who Elijah had hoped might be more open-minded, seemed hesitant to engage, their eyes betraying a mixture of fear and discomfort. One evening, Elijah decided to try a different approach. He organized a small potluck in his backyard, inviting all his neighbors. He hoped that a casual, informal gathering might foster a sense of community, a space where people could connect and share their concerns. He prepared his famous barbecue ribs, hoping the aroma of delicious food might break down some of the barriers. He even put on some gospel music, hoping the uplifting tunes might create a welcoming atmosphere. A few neighbors showed up, but the mood was strained and awkward. Small talk filled the air, punctuated by uncomfortable silences. When Elijah attempted to broach the subject of Arthur's harassment, the conversation quickly faltered. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their eyes darting around the yard, avoiding Elijah's gaze. The pleasantries and polite smiles were a thin veneer, masking a deeper unease. Mrs. Davis, a woman known for her outspoken nature, was the only one who dared to address the issue directly. "Reverend Jackson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we understand what you're going through. But Arthur, he's been around for a long time. He's always been a bit difficult. It's best not to make waves." Her words were a chilling revelation. Arthur's behavior wasn't just tolerated. It was accepted, even expected. He was a fixture in the community, a force to be reckoned with. And his neighbors were unwilling to challenge his authority, his hateful pronouncements. Their silence wasn't born of ignorance or apathy. It was a calculated decision, a conscious choice to prioritize their own comfort and safety over the well-being of their new neighbor. Elijah felt a wave of despair wash over him. He'd hoped for support, for solidarity, for a community that would stand up against injustice. Instead, he'd found a community paralyzed by fear, a community that had chosen silence over action, complicity over courage. He realized then that he was facing a battle far greater than Arthur Jenkins. He was fighting against the insidious power of apathy, the chilling weight of collective silence. The weight of isolation pressed down on him, a crushing burden that threatened to extinguish the flame of hope he'd so carefully nurtured. He knew then that he couldn't rely on his neighbors for support. He would have to find strength within himself, within his faith, to face the challenges ahead. The silence of Oakhaven was deafening, but it would not break him. He would find a way to overcome it, to make his voice heard, even if it was the only voice willing to speak out against the darkness that had settled over his new community. The air hung heavy with the promise of a storm. A thick, oppressive humidity clung to the skin, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and impending chaos. The sun, usually a comforting presence in Oakhaven, was hidden behind a curtain of dark, brooding clouds, casting long, ominous shadows across the neighborhood. Even the usually cheerful chirping of birds had ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness, a pregnant silence that hinted at the tempest brewing overhead. Elijah watched from his kitchen window as the first fat raindrops began to fall, splattering against the glass panes. The wind picked up, rattling the window frames and sending a shiver down his spine. Lily and Samuel were huddled together in the living room, playing a board game, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp. He felt a pang of protectiveness, a deep-seated concern for their safety. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within him, the brewing tempest reflecting the escalating tension in his life. The rain intensified, transforming into a torrential downpour. Lightning flashed, illuminating the landscape in brief, stark bursts of light, followed by deafening claps of thunder that shook the house to its foundations. The power flickered, plunging the house into darkness, then flickered back on, the lights buzzing ominously. The storm was a raw, untamed force of nature, a chaotic display of power that both terrified and mesmerized. Elijah glanced at the clock. It was almost 10 p.m. He hoped the storm would pass quickly, that his family would be able to sleep through the night. He knew, however, that the storm outside was only a small reflection of the larger storm brewing within his community, the tempest of hatred and prejudice that threatened to engulf them. Arthur Jenkins' harassment had become a constant, oppressive presence, a shadow that loomed over their lives, casting a pall of fear and uncertainty over their new home. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and doors. The rain beat against the roof, sounding like a relentless drumbeat. Elijah checked on his children, finding them huddled together, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. He reassured them, telling them stories to distract them from the storm's fury. He tried to project an image of calm, of unwavering strength, but deep down, he felt a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. The storm raged on, a relentless assault on the senses. The wind howled, the rain poured, and the thunder roared. Elijah found himself staring out the window, mesmerized by the spectacle of nature's raw power. He felt a strange sense of kinship with the storm, a shared experience of untamed energy and unpredictable force. He knew that the storm would eventually pass, that the sun would rise again, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the storm within his community was far more dangerous, far more enduring. The night was long and filled with the fury of nature, but it was also a night that would forever change the course of his life and the lives of those around him. The storm outside was a prelude to a far greater storm, one that would test his faith, his courage, and his capacity for forgiveness. The storm reached its peak around midnight. The wind howled with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the houses, and the rain fell in sheets, obscuring everything in a blurry, watery haze. Lightning flashed incessantly, illuminating the night sky with brief, blinding bursts of light, followed by ear-splitting claps of thunder that seemed to tear the heavens asunder. Elijah, despite his efforts to remain calm, felt a growing sense of unease. The storm's fury was unnerving, mirroring the turmoil within his own heart. Suddenly, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the neighborhood, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very earth beneath their feet. A moment later, a bright orange glow appeared in the distance, casting an eerie light across the rain-soaked streets. Elijah rushed to the window, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw it then, a fire engulfing Arthur Jenkins' house. Flames leaped from the windows, licking at the night sky, casting a hellish glow on the rain-soaked streets. Thick, black smoke billowed into the air, obscuring the house in a suffocating shroud. The air crackled with the energy of the storm and the intensity of the blaze. Elijah felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct to act, to help. He knew that Arthur, his wife, and their children were trapped inside. He raced to the phone, his fingers fumbling with the receiver. He dialed 911, his voice trembling slightly as he reported the fire. The dispatcher, her voice calm and efficient, instructed him to stay away from the house and await the arrival of the fire department. But Elijah couldn't just stand by and watch. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't let Arthur and his family perish in the flames, not after all the hatred and animosity that had passed between them. He grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, the rain plastering his clothes to his body. The wind buffeted him, the rain stinging his eyes, but he pressed on, driven by a desperate need to help. He reached the edge of Arthur's property, the heat from the fire intense, the air thick with smoke. He could hear the screams of Arthur's wife and children, their cries piercing through the roar of the storm and the crackle of the flames. The fire had engulfed the front of the house, making it impossible to enter through the main door. Elijah saw a small window on the side of the house, partially obscured by flames and smoke. He knew it was a long shot, but it was their only chance. He raced to the window, ignoring the searing heat and the choking smoke. He smashed the window with a rock, the sound barely audible above the storm's fury. He crawled through the broken window, the heat intense, the smoke thick and suffocating. He could barely see, but he could hear the screams, guiding him through the inferno. He crawled through the burning house, his clothes catching fire, his lungs burning with each breath. He could feel the flames licking at his skin, but he pressed on, driven by a force stronger than fear, a force born of compassion and a desperate need to save lives. He found Arthur's family huddled together in a back room, their faces contorted with terror. He helped them out of the house, one by one, carrying them to safety through the raging inferno. He emerged from the burning house, coughing and gasping for air, his body battered and bruised, but his heart filled with a strange sense of relief. He had saved them. He had saved Arthur and his family from the flames. The storm raged on, but in the midst of the chaos, a small act of courage and compassion had ignited a spark of hope. The fire raged, a monstrous beast consuming Arthur Jenkins' house. Flames danced and writhed, casting an infernal glow on the rain-soaked street. Thick, black smoke billowed into the night sky, a suffocating shroud that choked the air. The screams of Arthur's family, faint at first, grew louder, more desperate, piercing through the roar of the storm and the crackling of the flames. Elijah, despite the danger, felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct to act, to help. He knew the risks. He knew the house was a death trap, a fiery inferno that could claim his life as easily as it had consumed Arthur's home. He also knew Arthur. He knew the man's hateful words, his relentless harassment, the casual cruelty that had marked their interactions. He knew the man deserved none of his compassion. Yet, as he stood there, watching the flames consume the house, he felt a profound sense of empathy, a deep-seated urge to save the lives trapped within. The fire department hadn't arrived yet. Sirens wailed in the distance, but they were still minutes away. Every second counted. Each passing moment increased the likelihood of a tragic outcome. Elijah knew he couldn't wait. He had to act. He had to do something. He couldn't stand by and watch a family perish in the flames, regardless of the man's hateful words and actions. He He scanned the house, searching for a way in. The front door was engulfed in flames, making it impossible to approach. The windows were equally inaccessible, the heat too intense, the smoke too thick. Then, he spotted a small window on the side of the house, partially obscured by flames and smoke. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was their only chance. Ignoring the searing heat and the choking smoke, he raced towards the window. He found a rock and smashed the glass, the sound barely audible above the storm's fury. He crawled through the broken window, the heat intense, the smoke thick and suffocating. He could barely see, but he could hear the screams, guiding him through the inferno. He crawled through the burning house, his clothes catching fire, his lungs burning with each breath. He could feel the flames licking at his skin, but he pressed on, driven by a force stronger than fear, a force born of compassion and a desperate need to save lives. The heat was unbearable, the smoke almost impossible to breathe, but he pushed forward, fueled by an unwavering determination. He found Arthur's family huddled together in a back room, their faces contorted with terror. He helped them out of the house, one by one, carrying them to safety through the raging inferno. He emerged from the burning house, coughing and gasping for air, his body battered and bruised, but his heart filled with a strange sense of relief. He had saved them. He had saved Arthur and his family from the flames. The storm raged on, but in the midst of the chaos, a small act of courage and compassion had ignited a spark of hope. His actions were a testament to the power of faith, the strength of the human spirit, and the unexpected capacity for forgiveness. The heroic act was not just a rescue. It was a turning point, a moment that would forever alter the course of their lives. Elijah stumbled out of the burning house, coughing and gasping for air. His clothes were torn and smoldering, his skin blistered and raw. He could barely see through the smoke and rain, but he could hear the sirens growing closer, the flashing lights illuminating the night sky. He collapsed onto the rain-soaked lawn, his body trembling with exhaustion and the lingering effects of smoke inhalation. Arthur, his wife, Mary, and their two children, Emily and Tom, were huddled together a few feet away, wrapped in blankets provided by neighbors who had gathered at the scene. They were shaken, soot-covered, and visibly traumatized, but they were alive. Elijah had saved them. Paramedics rushed to their side, assessing their injuries. Mary had suffered minor burns on her arms and a sprained ankle. Emily had inhaled some smoke, and Tom had a minor cut on his head. Arthur, surprisingly, seemed relatively unscathed, though his face was pale and his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Elijah himself was treated for smoke inhalation and minor burns. The paramedics deemed his injuries non-life-threatening, but insisted he be taken to the hospital for observation. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, Elijah caught Arthur's eye. The man's gaze was intense, a complex mixture of gratitude, shame, and something akin to awe. There was no hatred in his eyes, no trace of the venom that had marked their previous encounters. Only a stunned silence, a profound sense of disbelief. It was a look that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of the heroic act that had just transpired. At the hospital, Elijah was examined and treated for his injuries. His burns were superficial, and the smoke inhalation wasn't severe. He was given oxygen and kept under observation for a few hours. He felt a dull ache in his muscles, a lingering reminder of his ordeal, but the pain was overshadowed by a profound sense of relief. He had saved a family he had previously considered his enemy. News of the fire and Elijah's heroic rescue spread quickly through Oak Haven. The community, initially paralyzed by apathy and fear, was now galvanized by the event. People came to the hospital to visit Elijah, offering their gratitude and apologies for their past indifference. They expressed their remorse for their silence, their complicity in Arthur's hateful behavior. The fire had become a catalyst for change, a turning point that had shattered the wall of silence and exposed the deep-seated prejudices that had long plagued their community. The incident also brought Arthur and his family closer to Elijah. They visited him in the hospital, their expressions filled with gratitude and a newfound respect. Arthur, in particular, seemed profoundly changed. The hatred that had once consumed him seemed to have been extinguished by the flames, replaced by a sense of humility and a deep appreciation for the man who had risked his life to save his family. The aftermath of the fire was not just about physical recovery. It was about emotional healing, a process of reconciliation that had begun in the midst of chaos and destruction. The heroic act had not only saved lives, but had also ignited a spark of hope, a promise of healing and transformation for the entire community. The smoke had cleared, the flames extinguished, but the emotional aftermath lingered, a heavy cloud hanging over Arthur Jenkins. He sat in his temporary accommodation, provided by the Red Cross, staring blankly at the charred remains of his home. The physical damage was devastating, but the internal damage was far greater. The events of the night had stripped away his carefully constructed facade of prejudice, revealing the raw, ugly truth of his own heart. He replayed the events in his mind, again and again, each iteration intensifying the shame and regret that gnawed at his soul. He saw himself, standing on his porch, spewing hateful words at Elijah, the man who had just risked his life to save his family. He saw the flames engulfing his house, the terror in his wife's and children's eyes, the desperate cries for help. And he saw Elijah, a silhouette against the raging inferno, a figure of selfless courage and unwavering compassion. The contrast was stark, jarring. His own pettiness, his hateful words, his relentless harassment, all of it seemed insignificant, pathetic, in the face of Elijah's heroic act. He had judged a man based on the color of his skin, condemned him without knowing him, subjected him to months of abuse, and yet this same man had risked his life to save his family. The humiliation was profound, a crushing weight of guilt and self-loathing. He thought of his children, huddled together in fear, their faces streaked with soot and tears. He had failed them, not only by allowing his house to burn, but also by teaching them, through his actions, the ugliness of prejudice. He had instilled in them a hateful ideology, a distorted worldview that had blinded him to the goodness of others. The thought filled him with a deep sense of remorse, a crushing weight of responsibility. He had always considered himself a good man, a pillar of his community. He had justified his hatred, his bigotry, by clinging to a narrow, outdated worldview. He had allowed fear and ignorance to dictate his actions, to shape his perception of others. But the fire had stripped away those illusions, revealing the emptiness of his prejudice, the hollowness of his hateful beliefs. He looked at his hands, still trembling slightly from the shock. He saw the calluses, the marks of a life spent working hard, providing for his family. He had always prided himself on his hard work, his dedication to his family. But what good was his hard work, his dedication, if it was fueled by hatred, if it was built on a foundation of prejudice? The regret was overwhelming, a tidal wave of shame that threatened to drown him. He had been wrong, terribly wrong. He had allowed his prejudices to blind him to the truth, to the inherent goodness of others. He had judged a man based on the color of his skin, and in doing so, he had missed the opportunity to know a truly remarkable individual. He had been a fool, a bigot, a man consumed by his own hatred. And now, he was left with nothing but the ashes of his home and the crushing weight of his own guilt. The fire had destroyed his house, but it had also burned away the darkness in his heart, leaving behind a space for something new, something better. The road to redemption would be long and difficult, but he was ready to begin. Days turned into weeks. Arthur's physical wounds healed, but the emotional scars remained, a constant reminder of his past actions and the profound impact of Elijah's selfless heroism. He couldn't shake the image of Elijah emerging from the burning house, a figure of unwavering courage and compassion, a stark contrast to his own hateful behavior. The shame was a constant companion, a heavy weight that pressed down on his soul. He spent hours staring at the charred remains of his home, the destruction a mirror reflecting the devastation within his own heart. He replayed the events of that night countless times, each iteration intensifying his feelings of regret and self-loathing. He had been a fool, a bigot, a man consumed by his own hatred. And now, he was left with nothing but the ashes of his home and the crushing weight of his own guilt. He knew he had to do something to make amends, to somehow atone for his past actions. He couldn't simply bury his guilt and move on. He had to confront his racism, to acknowledge the harm he had caused, and to seek forgiveness from the man he had so unjustly persecuted. One afternoon, he found himself standing before Elijah's house. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the doorbell. He had never been one for apologies, for admitting fault, but he knew he had to do this. He had to face Elijah, to express his remorse, to seek his forgiveness. He rang the doorbell, his heart pounding in his chest. He waited, his anxiety growing with each passing second. The door opened, revealing Elijah, his face etched with weariness, but his eyes filled with a surprising gentleness. "Mr. Jenkins," Elijah said, his voice calm and measured. "What can I do for you?" Arthur was taken aback by Elijah's composure, his unexpected kindness. He had expected anger, resentment, perhaps even rejection. But Elijah's demeanor was surprisingly forgiving, a stark contrast to the hatred Arthur had so freely dispensed. I came to apologize," Arthur stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "For everything. For the way I treated you, for the things I said. I was wrong. Terribly wrong." Elijah listened patiently, his eyes unwavering. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He simply listened, allowing Arthur to pour out his remorse, his shame, his regret. Arthur continued, his voice cracking with emotion. He confessed his prejudices, his ignorance, his fear. He acknowledged the harm he had caused, not just to Elijah but to his family and the entire community. He spoke of the fire, of the terror he had felt, and of the profound gratitude he felt towards the man who had risked his life to save his family. When Arthur finished, a long silence hung in the air. Then Elijah spoke, his voice soft but firm. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, "I forgive you." His words were not just an expression of forgiveness. They were an act of grace, an invitation to healing and reconciliation. Arthur was overcome with emotion. He had expected anger, rejection, perhaps even scorn. But Elijah's forgiveness was unexpected, overwhelming, a beacon of hope in the midst of his despair. He knew then that his journey to redemption had begun. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready to walk it, with the help of the man he had once considered his enemy, the man who had shown him the true meaning of compassion and forgiveness. The changed man stood before his Savior, ready for a new beginning. Elijah's forgiveness wasn't a simple act. It was a profound expression of faith, a testament to the transformative power of grace. He offered Arthur not just words of pardon, but also comfort and understanding. He listened patiently as Arthur recounted his struggles, his regrets, his newfound desire for change. He didn't judge or condemn. He offered empathy, compassion, and a path towards healing. Elijah invited Arthur to attend services at the church. He didn't pressure him, didn't push him. He simply extended an invitation, a gesture of welcome and acceptance. Arthur, initially hesitant, eventually agreed. He needed solace, a place of peace and reflection, a community that could offer him support and guidance on his journey towards redemption. The church became a sanctuary for Arthur, a place where he could find solace and a sense of belonging. He listened to Elijah's sermons, finding comfort and inspiration in the messages of forgiveness, redemption, and the transformative power of faith. He participated in community events, connecting with other members of the congregation, discovering a sense of camaraderie and support he had never experienced before. The church community embraced Arthur, not with blind acceptance, but with a compassionate understanding. They saw his sincerity, his genuine remorse, his willingness to change. They didn't condone his past actions, but they recognized his desire for redemption, his commitment to making amends. They offered him friendship, guidance, and a sense of belonging, helping him to rebuild his life, to find peace and purpose. Arthur's transformation was gradual but profound. He became an active member of the church, volunteering his time and sharing his story with others. He helped with community outreach programs, offering his support to those in need. He became a mentor to young people, sharing his experiences and warning them against the dangers of prejudice and hatred. He found solace in prayer, in the quiet moments of reflection, in the comforting presence of faith. He discovered a strength he never knew he possessed, resilience born of his remorse and his commitment to change. He learned to forgive himself, to accept his past mistakes, and to move forward with hope and determination. He also began to repair his relationship with his family. He apologized to his wife and children, confessing his failings and seeking their forgiveness. He committed to creating a more loving, supportive home environment, one free from the darkness of prejudice and hatred. His family, initially hesitant, eventually embraced his transformation, witnessing his genuine remorse and his unwavering commitment to change. His journey was not without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, of self-criticism, of lingering guilt. But he persevered, drawing strength from his faith, his family, and the supportive community he had found in the church. He learned that forgiveness wasn't just about receiving pardon. It was about granting it to oneself, about accepting one's imperfections and striving to become a better person. He embraced his new life, a life built on faith, forgiveness, and a commitment to making amends. The church became his refuge, his guiding light, his path to redemption. The journey was far from over, but he was finally walking it, not alone, but surrounded by a community of love, understanding, and unwavering support. Arthur's baptism was a pivotal moment, not just for him, but for the entire Oakhaven community. It was a public declaration of his commitment to faith, his acceptance of forgiveness, and his desire for a new beginning. The church was filled to capacity, a testament to the profound impact of his story. People from all walks of life, including those who had previously ignored or dismissed his hateful actions, were present to witness his transformation. Reverend Jackson's sermon was a powerful message of hope and reconciliation, a call for the community to confront its own prejudices and embrace the transformative power of forgiveness. He spoke of Arthur's journey, his struggles, his repentance, and his unwavering commitment to change. He emphasized the importance of empathy, understanding, and the need to create a community built on love, acceptance, and mutual respect. Arthur's active participation in the church became a symbol of hope and healing for Oakhaven. He became a testament to the power of forgiveness and the transformative nature of faith. He volunteered his time, sharing his story with others, inspiring them to confront their own biases and prejudices. He became a mentor to young people, teaching them the importance of tolerance, understanding, and the need to treat everyone with respect and dignity. His transformation had a ripple effect throughout the community. People who had previously remained silent, who had chosen apathy over action, began to speak out, to challenge the prejudices that had long plagued their neighborhood. They organized community events promoting diversity and inclusion, fostering dialogue and understanding between different groups. They formed alliances, working together to address the underlying issues of racism and intolerance that had divided them for so long. The community began to heal, to confront its past mistakes, and to build a new future based on mutual respect and understanding. The fire that had destroyed Arthur's house had also burned away the darkness that had long shrouded Oakhaven. It had become a catalyst for change, a turning point that had exposed the community's prejudices and ignited a desire for healing and reconciliation. Elijah and Arthur's relationship became a symbol of hope and reconciliation, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the transformative nature of faith. They worked together to build a stronger, more inclusive community, one where everyone felt safe, accepted, and valued. They organized community events, fostering dialogue and understanding between different groups. They became advocates for social justice, working to address the underlying issues of racism and intolerance that had long divided their community. The new Oakhaven was not merely a geographical location. It was a community transformed, a place where differences were celebrated, where prejudices were challenged, and where forgiveness paved the way for a brighter future. Arthur, once a symbol of hatred and division, became a beacon of hope and reconciliation, a testament to the power of faith, the strength of the human spirit, and the transformative potential of forgiveness. His journey was a reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal, that even the most entrenched prejudices can be overcome, and that even in the face of adversity, hope can prevail. The new beginning was not just for Arthur. It was for the entire community, a testament to the power of transformation and the enduring strength of the human spirit.